The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. I've received a lot of requests for a teen-friendly version of the Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter, and so, as a holiday gift to my listeners, I've re-recorded the updated version of the story, and will be releasing it in the month of December. Much of the story remains the same, with a handful of scenes receiving a few funny changes. Please be aware that while the story isn't explicit, it does have language that's not meant for very young children. I will resume regular episodes with new content in January, and I hope you enjoy this. Summary. The Muggle man was browsing the stacks at Flourish and Blotts when Lucius spotted something that would change the course of history. The Muggle had a dark mark. Surely this man, the father of a mudblood, Lucius reminded himself, hadn't been a Death Eater. Lucius didn't know how it was possible, but he vowed there and then that he and his family would do everything in their power to protect this man's daughter. Their very lives could depend upon it. Chapter 1. The Secret Serpent. Saturday, July 27th, 1991. Ah, geez, crab cake! I've driven this street twice now, and I still can't find a spot to park. Richard Granger craned his neck at an emptying spot hopefully, but it was only a taxi stand. Hermione, are you certain this is the right address? We passed number 14, but there was no sign for a pub, and the street number 14 7/8 doesn't seem to exist, love, said Linda, her fingers trailing along a map of the city as her husband drove. Mum, it was right back there. Didn't you see it? Between the little music shop and the greengrocer. There was nothing there between them, crabcake. Richard frowned. Suddenly a spot seemed to magically open up ahead, and he eagerly snapped on his blinker. Ah, here we are! Once the little family had unfolded themselves from the car, Hermione pointed ahead. There, do you see it now? The brass and cast-iron sign showed an outline of a witch stirring a cracked cauldron. A steady drip fell down to the pavement below. The sign read, The Leaky Cauldron, established 1531. The grocer and the music shop are right next to each other. There's nothing... Linda began, but then, as if by instinct, Hermione held her mother's hand in her right hand and pulled the pub's door with her left. Her mother's eyes lit up as the door seemed to push, to grow, from a hairline crack in the wall in front of them. Linda reached back in shock for the befuddled Richard, who likewise startled as the pub door came into view for him as well. Ah, geez, was all the mild-mannered man said. Mum, Dad, you'll simply never believe the books this shop has. Look at the spell books, and this one about werewolves. Linda stole an interested glance at the cover of that one. Not many magical dentists for the werewolf community, I take it. This fellow looks as though a few crowns wouldn't be enough. I wonder if he's flossing. Mum! Hermione laughed. Ah, geez, it's warm in here, isn't it? Richard approached, rolling up his shirt sleeves as he came. Crabcake, didn't we pass an ice cream shop a bit back? What say we see if they've got raspberry? They do. A languid voice drawled from behind the little family. Lucius Malfoy had noticed the family of Muggles nearly as soon as they'd entered Flourish and Blotts. They'd been hard to ignore. The mudblood child, clearly preparing to enter Hogwarts, had exclaimed excitedly over nearly everything in sight, much to the annoyance of a handful of older patrons. His own son, Draco, seemed to be highly distracted by the young witch. That would not do at all. Draco needed to keep his mind focused on his studies and on making connections with other purebloods, not concerning himself with mudblood witches. Lucius and Draco were nearly done making their selections when he'd seen it. The Muggle man, who had been browsing titles in the Transfiguration section of the shop, was walking back to his wife and daughter, removing his jumper as he went. In a moment his sleeves were rolled up, exposing it for all to see. A dark mark. But it wasn't just any dark mark. Instead of one snake coiling around a skull, this one had 2 snakes, intertwined, encircling a wand, and at the top 2 wings. The wings of victory, perhaps. Surely this Muggle man, the father of a mudblood, Lucius reminded himself, hadn't been a Death Eater. And yet the mark was there, clearly visible. It wasn't just any mark, either. Lucius had seen many over his years, and no one had 2 snakes. This had to be a special dark mark. It made Lucius hesitant, afraid. Yes, he had been a servant of the Dark Lord, had followed the wizard's ways diligently for many years, and yet, when things got difficult, when it appeared that the Dark Lord had been defeated, Lucius had been one of the first to claim that he had been Imperiist, that he had fallen victim to the Dark Lord, rather than servant. Though rumors swirled that the Dark Lord might still be alive, might have even left a scion or a successor, still Lucius took the easy path and stayed within the confines of polite, accepting wizarding society. It had been difficult, of course. Many of his friends, his comrades, all still believed the old truths. They all still worked insidiously, privately. Rather than meeting in the halls of the ministry, they met in dark studies, in manor homes, tongues loosened only after a couple of drinks. "Father," Draco said to him, tugging on his sleeve, "what's wrong?" Lucius looked down at his son, then turned his gaze back to the Muggles. His son's eyes slid back to the family, focusing once again on the girl. "That man, I believe he serves the same master as I do." Draco turned a skeptical, appraising glance on the man. He knew, of course, all about the Dark Lord and his nearly successful bid to take over the wizarding world before Draco had been born. But as far as Draco knew, he'd only recruited pure-blood folk, not Muggles. But Lucius Malfoy was sweeping up to them, cloak gently billowing behind him. Draco hesitated. He wanted to go closer. He had never encountered Muggles or a mudblood before, having spent the entirety of his childhood surrounded by purebloods or the occasional half-blood. This was like encountering someone from another world, but it felt dodgy. He had no idea what they were like, how they would act. He'd heard that Muggles were dirty, dangerous, and yet this girl didn't seem either of those. She was picking up books, reading the covers aloud as though reading in a foreign language, exclaiming over them as though they were something different and interesting, rather than regular books. Whenever she encountered something completely normal, a memo flying through the air, or a quill writing in the ledger on its own, she stopped to marvel as though she'd found something completely unique. It was odd, and strangely captivating to watch. But his father had already reached the small family, and fearful of being left behind, Draco hurried along after him. He had no idea what conversation he thought he was walking into. Was his father challenging this man to a duel? Would this man kill Lucius on sight for having renounced the Dark Lord? Would Lucius welcome the man, invite him to attend one of the clandestine meetings he attended of fellow followers of the Dark Lord? And yet, in a surprising turn, Draco walked into the midst of a discussion about ice cream. "Yes, indeed. Raspberry, banana, mango. I believe every so often even pineapple," said Lucius meaningfully. He raised a critical eyebrow, interested to see how the Muggle man accepted the word pineapple. Traditionally, the pineapple was meant as a symbol of welcome, but as symbols often are, it had been co-opted by followers of the Dark Lord. At galas and banquets, to have a drink with a pineapple slice in it meant that you were open to the ideas of the Dark Lord. "Ah, geez, that's my favourite. You don't find it too often." "Indeed, you do not. I take it you were also a fan of dark chocolate. Another code. This, then, would be the confirmation. If this man admitted to dabbling in the dark arts, Lucius would know who he was dealing with. Absolutely! Although I hate the stains on the enamel that it can leave behind. Lucius gasped. This had to be a follower, then. It had been a common turn of phrase used by the Dark Lord, the stains upon wizarding society that Muggles left behind in the form of mudbloods, the stain of dirty blood. There could be no doubt. This man, masquerading as a Muggle, had been one of the closest confidants of the Dark Lord. The symbol upon his arm had to represent the closeness he had shared with the Dark Lord, two snakes of the same ilk, impossibly intertwined. Lucius bowed low, and after a moment the man jerkily followed suit. This was encouraging. Perhaps he might not kill Lucius as soon as he found out about Lucius's traitorousness. And yet his curiosity got the best of him. Your mark. At this, Lucius gestured vaguely to his own left forearm. It is, rather unique, is it not? The man looked down at the mark, flexing it slightly, holding it out a bit from his body. Lucius reflexively reared back, afraid of what the mark might do to him. Oh, yeah, I got that back in the service. I was an attending with the SAS back in the day, back before I chose my specialty. SAS? Lucius asked, before he could help himself. Yes, you know, a special air service. Lucius nodded, not wanting to look ill-informed. He knew that the Dark Lord had been working on a method of flying without need of a broom. Voldemort had felt it important, wishing to have the ability to move without relying upon other objects. This, then, might have been what this man's role was, developing the magic needed for such an amazing feat. Indeed, I do, Lucius replied silkily. Weren't you part of a bunch of operations, Dad? Lots of top-secret, clandestine ops. The girl had joined them with a knowing giggle, the witch with wild curly hair and bright copper eyes. She stood close to Draco, and Lucius could immediately discern a difference in his son's demeanour. Where before Draco had been on guard but curious, now he appeared to have a slightly panicked look in his eye. And who is this? Lucius asked graciously. Ah, my daughter, Hermione. Hermione, I want you to meet... sorry, I didn't get your name. Lucius Malfoy, of the House of Malfoy, Lucius said, bowing low to the girl. My son, Draco. At this, the girl giggled slightly, and Draco's look of panic turned to slight anger. What's so funny? Oh, I apologize. It's just such an unusual name, Draco. It means dragon, yes? Yes, Draco said, faltering. It's very nice. I'm Hermione. Not many people are familiar with the name Hermione. I imagine Draco is also unfamiliar to most people. Draco, who was familiar with nearly everyone in Wizarding Society, was confused, but chose not to answer. In any case, she did not appear to need an answer, rushing headlong back into the last topic of conversation. Yes, Dad was part of a bunch of operations back in the day. What was that one in the 70s, Dad? You know, the one in Ireland. The man's look had gone from affable to closed off very quickly. Yes, I assisted in several operations back in the day. Bloody stuff, nothing Mr. Malfoy wants to hear about, I'm sure. Lucius breathed very shallowly. Several bloody operations. This man was highly dangerous. He had to be treated carefully. And this girl, who was she in all of this? So, Hermione, you were also beginning at Hogwarts in September? Asked Lucius. Yes, I'm so excited. There's so much to learn, a whole new world to explore. The girl's eyes were alight and shining, a vivacity and voraciousness within them. Lucius was struck immediately by a familiarity that made him extremely uncomfortable. This girl reminded him of someone, but he was not sure who. Ah, geez, yes, there's so much to see. and was so excited that our little girl gets to experience this." The man turned to Draco. "Hopefully she can rely on you to show her around. Get her familiar with your world at school. Can I count on you?" Draco froze. He had no idea what to say to this, and only nodded. Lucius recognized the request for what it was. The girl was important to the cause, and must be protected. "Of course. Draco would be honored to assist the child of such a noble man." "Okay, then." The man smiled. Lucius was dismissed. "Well, we shall let you return to your purchases. Please, enjoy the rest of your afternoon." Lucius bowed once more, and the man stuck out his hand. Lucius pulled back fearfully, but after a moment realized that the man wished to grasp hands with him. Hesitantly, he placed his hand in the other man's grip and firmly shook it. "I'm Richard, by the way. Richard Granger." "Of course," Lucius said. This was unsurprising to him. Richard was a name that meant ruler, leader. Lucius had no doubt that this man was just that. He needed to spread the word. This man was dangerous, and this girl, this witch, this child of his, must be protected at all costs. Chapter 2. The Rhinestone Reception. Content warning. Brief description of past gore. Wednesday, August 7th, 1991. "Lindy Hop, is that an owl I see out there?" Richard and Linda Granger had just settled down for breakfast when a tapping on the window caught their attention. As Hermione's letter for Hogwarts had been brought by a witch named Minerva McGonagall, the Grangers had never encountered owl post, and were immediately enamored. Richard opened the window, and the large silvery owl stepped in with an aristocratically imperious air, as though being welcomed by his royal court. The large beast lifted one leg and balanced carefully on the other, allowing Linda to take the letter tied there. "Dearest Lord and Lady Granger, I truly hope this communique finds you well. As an esteemed family within the wizarding community, the Malfoy family would take great pleasure in your company for a reception in your honor this Saturday, August 10th, 1991, at 6 o'clock in the evening. We would be most pleased to welcome your family into our home, so that you may meet others of our kind. Eustace will arrive at 6 to escort you, if that is acceptable. Please respond using our owl, Colwyn, at your earliest leisure. In gratitude, Lucius Abraxas and Narcissa Black Malfoy." "Well, that's very kind," Richard said uncertainly. "I hope they didn't go into too much trouble." "I'm sure they do it for all the Muggle-born families." Linda waved her hand dismissively. "Though I suppose it will be nice. What do you wear to a wizarding reception?" "I'm guessing that fancy dress witch cozy that you wore years ago at Halloween was a tad inaccurate, no?" Richard laughed. The owl looked unamused. "Goodness, no! Some of the witches we saw there in Diagon Alley wore long dresses, even during the day. I suppose it will be rather formal," Linda said worriedly. She hadn't counted on going shopping for 2 formal dresses and a tuxedo between now and Saturday. Hermione was nervous. Her first wizarding event, and she had no idea what kinds of things were in store for her. Did one curtsy? Would there be dancing? Did wizards use forks? She hadn't thought to buy a wizarding etiquette book back at Flourish and Blotts, and now on Saturday afternoon she was kicking herself. If there was dancing, would she dance with Draco? Did all young wizards look as nice as him? The thought made her uncomfortably warm. The only boys that looked like that were usually on the telly or in films. Ordinary boys, like the ones she'd attended Pruitt Day School with, were nothing like that. She had noticed him across the bookshop before they came over, of course. He and his father, with their white blonde hair and dark robes, stood out a mile. But when they introduced themselves, She was able to see his silver eyes up close. They were so striking, and the intensity of his glare when she had giggled. It was unexpected. She put on the dress her mother had selected from Harrods, a splurge, to be sure. It was her first formal, full-length dress, a delicate gold with a boat neck and a gored skirt. She felt far older than 11, though to be fair she was nearly 12, practically a woman. She came downstairs at 5:30, then went back upstairs at 5:38 to try and tame her hair a bit more. At 5:43 she put on a bit of her mother's makeup. At 5:47 she vigorously wiped it off. Both parents were tearing around their bedroom, dressing hurriedly as Richard had fallen asleep in front of the telly, and Linda had lost track of time in the garden. At 5:58 the three Grangers found themselves generally well attired and coiffed, standing in the foyer, awaiting this mysterious Eustace. But there was no one coming up the walk, no cars turning into the drive. From behind them they heard a loud whoosh in the living room. All three hurried into the room, then stood there, slack-jawed. Standing at their fireplace was Draco Malfoy, the young man they'd met in the bookshop. Next to him, a small creature with kindly eyes and a towel toga held the boy's hand. Richard was the first to overcome his shock. "Hiya, Draco, is it? How'd you get here, son?" Draco's brow knitted. "I came by flu. Father had your fireplace connected earlier today. I'm too young to apparate," he said, as though this explained everything. Geez, of course you are. Well, come in. You remember Hermione?" Draco fixed Hermione with a gaze that said he did remember her. Although he looked far less annoyed than he had in the bookshop, Hermione was pleased to see. She stepped forward stiltedly. "Hello, Draco. Thanks for inviting my family to your house." "It is our great pleasure to welcome you and your esteemed parents to Malfoy Manor," Draco said in a brittle, practised manner. He bowed to her stiffly, then reached for her hand, kissing the back of it perfunctorily. She blushed and wondered if she should curtsy, then decided she would look silly. "What is that?" Draco asked in alarm. He tried to keep his tone curious, but he could tell that it came out a bit fearfully as well. She followed his eyes. He was staring at the telly, which had been muted but left on the football match that her father had been watching. Football? I think it's Man U, but I don't know. I wasn't watching." "What? The box? I mean, are there people in there?" A note of fear crept into his voice. Did the Muggles keep people prisoner, shocking inside this box? No, it's a television," Linda said. "A moving picture. It's a lot of tiny images shown really fast, one after the other." "All pictures move," Draco said matter-of-factly. Then he glanced at the mantel where several family photos were gathered. "But your pictures don't." At this, he frowned. "Do you mean photographs? Do visiting photographs move?" Hermione asked curiously. "Yes," Draco said eagerly. "So this box is a photograph." "Sort of. It will take too long to explain. Perhaps one day you can come back and watch it," Richard offered magnanimously. "Watch a photograph? Does it talk back to you?" "No," said Richard. The five of them stood there for a moment, unsure where to go from here. Finally Draco said, "I would be most honoured." He bowed to Richard, who bowed back after a moment of confusion. "Okay then, shall we go?" Richard gestured to the front door, but Draco turned to the fireplace. "Lady Granger, Miss Granger." Draco held out both elbows to Linda and Hermione, and they stepped hesitantly to stand next to him. "Lord Granger, will you please follow with Eustace?" "Okie dokie," said Richard. "Miss Draco, sir." Draco called over his shoulder helpfully as Eustace threw a pinch of green powder into the grate. Hermione suppressed a giggle. "Okie, Draco," Richard called agreeably. Green flames erupted in the grate, and before they realized what was happening, Draco was pulling them into the fire. "Oh, no, spoke Linda quickly, but they were already stepping into the flames. The sensation was warm, but not hot, a bit like a gust of hot air on a scorching summer's day. There was an odd pulling, spinning sensation, and then they were standing on a large hearth, peering into a cavernous slate-grey room decorated with stately black drapes, white George III Chippendale sofas, and crystal chandeliers. In front of them stood Lucius Malfoy and a beautiful blonde witch that could only be Draco's mother. "Ah, Lady Granger," Lucius began. It's Linda. Lady Linda, please meet my wife, Narcissa Black Malfoy." The two women smiled and grasped hands, and Linda gestured Hermione forward. "This is my daughter, Hermione. She will be starting at Hogwarts in September." "How lovely to meet both of you, and to welcome you into our home." Narcissa's gaze was warm but appraising. Behind them, another whoosh, and Richard stepped through the flames with Eustace. The small elf snapped his fingers and popped away. "Hello, you must be Draco's mother." Richard held out his hand without waiting for an introduction. "I'm Richard." "Narcissa Black Malfoy, lovely to meet you," she said cordially, taking his casual manner in stride as she shook his hand daintily. "Let us make our way to the drawing-room. We are enjoying a bit of music and drinks before dinner." "Ah, geez, that sounds lovely." Richard held out an arm to Narcissa so that she could lead the way, and Lucius stepped up to Linda, taking her hand firmly and placing it in the crook of his elbow to walk behind their spouses. This left Draco with Hermione. He held out his arm to her, and, not knowing what else to do, she linked her arm through his. He startled a bit at her touch, and then began to walk quite fast, behind his parents. She nearly had to jog to keep up. Ahead, they could make out bits of the adults' conversation. "Lady Linda, I simply adore your necklace. Are those family jewels?" Narcissa asked graciously. "Goodness, no. I believe I got this at Woolies 20 years ago," Linda said bashfully, touching her rhinestone necklace. "Yes, before we got here we had a neck-decorating contest. It was a tie, so I won." Hermione shook her head. Dad loved corny jokes, and the more nervous he got, the sillier they were. Next to her, Hermione heard the slightest noise. She turned to look at Draco, and her eyes widened to see him trying to suppress a smile. Lucius had hoped that sending Draco to retrieve the Grangers would be seen as disarming. He'd hoped to convey to Richard that he and his family would rather follow than attempt to take command, should a question of authority or seniority arise. He was uncertain if it had worked. On the one hand, Richard and his wife seemed gracious, even friendly. And yet, that comment. A neck-decorating contest, he'd called it. It stirred unpleasant memories from his youth in Lucius's mind. Lord Voldemort had no qualms about resorting to Muggle violence at times during his bid for control of the wizarding world. He rather admired bloodthirsty killers and sought to copy their techniques. One such killer, Jack the Ripper, was known for slashing the throats of his victims and often disemboweling them. He could still hear the cold voice of his master, ordering his men to kill the Muggle vagrants they had rounded up one night. "Slash their throats! Ah, yes! Let us decorate their necks with blood!" Lucius had been quite young, barely out of Hogwarts. It had been difficult. His first murder, in fact. They did get easier and more common as time went by, but one never forgets the first. To be reminded of it so pointedly sent an icicle of fear down his spine. The reception went as well as one could hope. The witches and wizards seemed genuinely kind and welcoming to Richard and Linda. After dinner, at which Hermione was pleased to note that magical folk did indeed use forks, the ladies gathered in the living room, whilst the men adjourned to Lucius's study. Hermione and Draco were left with a handful of others around their age. She was glad to see that her dress wasn't so far off from the other girls', though the others were all carefully styled and coiffed. She patted her own hair nervously. "So, Tell us about Muggles. Do they read? A dark-haired girl named Pansy asked, with a frosty smirk. It's Hermione. Of course they read, Pansy. Do we not explain we met her family in a bookshop? Merlin, Draco, I didn't mean to get your knickers in a twist. Calm yourself. I was just making conversation. Make it better. Draco seemed annoyed. It's all right. Before I found out I was a witch, I had no idea how magical people were. I honestly wasn't sure if you used forks before tonight, Hermione said. This garnered a small laugh from some of them. Pansy narrowed her eyes at Hermione, then seemed to come to some kind of conclusion. I guess we're all a bit dense in this regard. But apparently we're beholden to watch out for you for some reason, Pansy. It was Draco again. I was just going to say, you seem all right for a Muggle-born. And you seem all right for a witch, Hermione said, raising an eyebrow. So, Richard, Lucius tells us that you hold a unique position, let us say. A tall, imposing man said after the fire whiskies had been dispersed to the men gathered there. Richard sipped the drink, finding it stronger than usual. Oh, well, I'm not sure what you mean. Sorry, Antonin, was it? Yes. I just meant with your time in service to... Antonin Dolohov gestured vaguely at Richard's left arm and nodded knowingly. Ah, jeez, of course. Yeah, I suppose there's not a lot of wizards in that occupation. No, Malcolm Davis spoke up. It is a rare breed among magical folk, though not as rare, I would assume, as it is in the mundane world. Oh, yeah. It's getting harder and harder to recruit good people into the service, I'm sure. Too many other opportunities or distractions, I suppose. Plus, the threats that we used to face, pretty much disappeared soon after the Berlin Wall fell. Not wanting to appear uninformed about this mysterious wall of Merlin, the men all nodded sagely. Likely it had something to do with the statute of secrecy. And your missions? What can you share of those? Ah, geez. I really don't like to speak of them, if I'm being honest. It was a dark time, and it's in the past, although I suppose I could be called up at any time to serve again. There was an almost imperceptible collective gasp in the room. The men shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging worried looks. Did this man know something they did not? Was the Dark Lord attempting to rise again? All of these men had publicly renounced the Dark Lord, claiming to be Imperiist or coerced. None of them had seen the inside of Azkaban, and they lived as seemingly productive members of society. But if there was a chance that the Dark Lord could come back, no longer would they need to kowtow to inept ministry officials, deal in back alleys or dark rooms for their trades, put their families at risk, if they were able to move out into the open. On the other hand, the Dark Lord had been dangerous at the best of times, quick to anger and vengeful to anyone that he perceived as turning against him. If he were to return, it might spell disaster for them. And this man seemed to know things. Perhaps he had some kind of contact with Voldemort. Perhaps he knew something they did not, could give them forewarning, or at least offer them protection. Even if he couldn't, these men could not afford to anger him. And what of your daughter? If you were to return to his service, how would she fare? This was Tiberius Knott. Richard appeared momentarily confused by the odd pronoun, but carried on. Perhaps wizards weren't aware that Her Majesty had taken over the crown, and as Commander-in-Chief of the British Armed Forces in the 1950s. Oh, I think my Hermione can handle it. She's a smart girl. She knows plenty about the world and what's happening in it. I'm sure if I were called to return to service, she would be proud of me and support me. Heck, I could even see her going into the service when she comes of age. She's always been very high-minded, wanting to make a difference, that sort of thing. Richard attempted another sip of the fire whiskey, but gave it up as a bad job. Lucius stood solemnly. Perhaps it may come to that, Lord Granger. Only seers can prophesy the future. Though, rest assured, we will do everything in our power to support the cause. I believe I speak for everyone here when I say, our families and I shall stand with you and your daughter if the moment arises."
Richard's brow furrowed in confusion.
Geez, that's great. I think spending a bit of time in the service is a good character builder. Let's just hope it doesn't result in trench warfare, am I right?
Lucius stared at Richard in confusion.
"I'm not sure what you mean." "Well, it would be a last-ditch effort, certainly."
Richard smiled, but was met with stony silence.
"You know, trench warfare."
But no one laughed. Tough crowd, Richard thought. Chapter 3. The Prisons and the Promise. August 19th, 1991. "Must I really have dinner with these Muggles, Father? Surely there is some other way to get them on our side. Wasn't the reception enough?" Draco's protest fell on deaf ears. Lucius had been a nervous wreck since the night of the reception, 2 weeks prior, and he would have none of it. If there was a chance of their own and Draco's survival, they must ingratiate themselves with the Grangers.
"Silence! You did not hear this man. There was talk of rejoining the Dark Lord's army, of children taking up arms, of slitting throats, of trench warfare."
Lucius truthfully had no idea what trench warfare meant, nor did the Malfoy library. However, it sounded atrocious, and he was not keen to find out.
"Fine," Draco grumbled. "I only hope their house elves are more adept at cooking than they are at welcoming guests. Eustace and I stood there for nearly 30 seconds, waiting for someone to receive us, you know."
Lucius struggled not to roll his eyes at Draco's proclamation. The boy really did live a sheltered life, he thought. It was an ordinary Wednesday evening, 2 weeks before the start of term at Hogwarts. Mere days after the reception, Linda had used the loner owl that the Malfoys had provided to contact Narcissa. She'd wished to discuss meals and sleeping arrangements at Hogwarts Castle. This started a nearly daily discourse between the two women, which resulted in Draco garnering an invitation to the Grangers' home for dinner. Now, it was nearly 6 in the evening, the time that the Grangers expected him, and Draco was nervous, something he'd never want to admit to his father. He smoothed his hands over his hair one final time, then stepped to the hearth. "You're sure they won't hurt me?" Draco asked in a small voice, now that the moment was nigh. Lucius faltered. In truth, he wasn't certain. Richard seemed affable enough, it was true, but the Dark Lord himself had seemed cordial, even friendly, when Lucius had first known him. "I believe you will be safe," Lucius finally answered. "And it is for the best if you go alone. My presence may be perceived as a challenge to the man, and besides, his defences may be lowered around you. Perhaps he will reveal something to you that he might have kept hidden from me. Yes," he finished as though trying to convince himself. "Yes, Draco, you must do this alone." "Fine," Draco grumbled. He took a pinch of flu powder and a deep breath and called out, "Heathgate 16, Hampstead." "So, Draco, are you looking forward to starting at Hogwarts? Have you visited the school before?" Linda Granger asked kindly.
"Yes. My father is on the Board of Governors, so we visit once a year or so."
Draco took another bite of his meal, amazed at how delicious it was.
"I must say, Lady Granger, your elves have outdone themselves."
Linda looked at him blankly. "My what?"
"Your elves. This meal is delicious. To be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect."
"Ah, yes. Well, I will be sure to pass on the word to the, elves at Hunane Garden." Linda smiled into her paper napkin. "Their elves really do have such nimble little fingers, don't they? To be able to get those little slips of paper inside of those fortune cookies." Richard fixed his wife with a mirthful glance. "Dad," Hermione said warningly.
"Just kidding, crab cake."
He turned to Draco.
"So, Draco, do you like football? I've got a good one for you. Why was the half-man, half-horse so good at football?"
"Sorry?" Draco asked in confusion.
"Because he was the centaur forward."
Richard grinned maniacally at Draco, but Draco didn't smile back. "Are you in touch with the centaurs, then?" This was valuable information that his father likely didn't know.
We were talking about football,"
Richard said bemusedly. "Sorry, I have no idea what that is," Draco said politely.
"Really? Well, if you like, we can watch—"
Richard began eagerly, but was interrupted by Hermione. "Dad, Mum and I really don't want to watch football tonight. How about a film instead?"
"All right, you win, crab cake."
Draco inhaled sharply at how quickly and easily Richard acquiesced to his daughter's demands. He wondered if all Muggles were like this, or if it was because Hermione was as vital to the cause as his father thought she was. Or was it just because she was her? It was quite clear to Draco, after spending a couple of evenings now with Hermione, that she was quite bright. He had always thought of himself as rather intelligent, had always been told this by his parents and tutors, but she was clearly head and shoulders above him. She had obviously devoured most of her textbooks already. Half the time, when either of the Grangers posed a question to Draco about the magical world, it was Hermione that answered. And she was animated, excited about things. She didn't seem to be satisfied with only knowing about parts of things. She needed all of it. When dinner was over, Richard and Linda cleared the table whilst Hermione took Draco into the living room to find something to watch. "What kinds of entertainment do you like?" she asked. "Cartoons? Aladdin? No, I'm not in the mood. Not Hocus Pocus. That's a little too on the nose and possibly offensive. Star Wars? That might take too long to explain. Or, what about Honey, I Shrunk the Kids? That's a fun one." 2 hours on, Draco was as nervous as Lucius had been at the reception for the Grangers. Muggles might not have wands, but with the ability to shrink human beings to the size of insects, they didn't need them. And with his curly brown hair and thick glasses, Lord Granger looked a whole lot like the Muggle man inside the little box, who had been responsible for shrinking his children. It wasn't hard for Draco to picture himself, shrunk down to nothing, drowning in a glass of water. After the film, Draco sat on the sofa, trying to control his breathing. He did not wish to show fear, and yet he knew it was written all over his face.
"Oh dear,"
Linda said, after taking one look at him.
"It's all right, Draco. It was just a made-up story."
As though Draco would believe that. Clearly the shrinking had happened. Otherwise, what had they just seen? He watched with suspicion as the little box atop the larger box whirred loudly. Then Richard pressed a button on the little box and a rectangular black object popped out. Written clearly along the edge of the black object were the titular words from this film. This, then, must be where the miniaturized people were stored. He watched with trepidation as Richard stowed the black rectangle inside of its own colourful box on a shelf, which Draco now realized was filled with several dozen others. Were all of these small prisons, then? Did every Muggle have a small prison sitting on a shelf in their home, its own little self-contained world? Was he currently sitting in a small prison on a small shelf within someone's home, unaware of his shrunken existence? As Draco quietly and desperately contemplated this intensely stressful existential crisis, Hermione and Linda were discussing dessert.
"The Eve's pudding should be about done by now, sweet, if you can mix up a bit of custard."
"Sure, Mum. Draco, do you like Eve's pudding?" Born with an insatiable sweet tooth, Draco could always eat pudding. His mind was torn. Do everything he could to escape this Muggle house of horrors, or eat pudding with them. Eve's pudding, you say? What's that?" His mouth was saying before his mind had a chance to intervene. "It's just an apple dessert with a bit of cake and custard." That decided it, then. "I love it," he responded. 20 minutes later, Draco was contemplating whether life inside of a small box on a shelf would be so horrible if he were given this dessert at every meal. As he scooped up the final bit of his 4th helping, he made eye contact with Hermione across the table and gave her a small smile. She smiled back shyly, the corners of her eyes crinkling over the rim of her glass of milk. Could a family that served something this amazing be all bad? September 1st, 1991. It was nearing 11 o'clock in the morning, and Linda was already tired of this odd situation. Since their arrival 30 minutes before, no fewer than 10 wizards had bowed to her husband, as though he were royalty. Many of them bestowed a sweeping bow upon her and Hermione as well. To call it disconcerting was an understatement. "What the bloody hell is going on?" she whispered to Richard, her face clenched in a smile. "I don't know, just go with it," he said, an equally wide grin plastered on his own face. "Maybe they really like meeting new people. Some of these folks look as though they haven't left the house since Queen Victoria died." It was true. Though there were plenty of young people and their parents milling about in Muggle attire or robes that could pass as overcoats on the streets of London, there were several men who wore ruffled shirts with brocade jackets, and women in high-necked dresses. "Does that dress have a bustle?" Linda whispered incredulously. Richard turned to look, but was waved off by his wife. "No, don't look, love. She'll think you're staring at her ass." "Well, it probably builds muscle to carry around that bustle," Richard joked. "Could be worth staring at." "Stop it," Linda giggled. Hermione ran up to them, her dark school robes billowing. "Mum and Dad, an older boy showed me where to load my trunk. Can you come help me lift it up?" "Sure, Crabcake." Richard followed his daughter, removing his jacket as he walked. He helped another father, a balding, red-haired man with glasses, who appeared to be loading several trunks himself. When they'd finished, he turned to shake the man's hand. As they had been loading the trunks, the man appeared friendly, making conversation about the fact that he had 4 children going to Hogwarts this year, whilst next year it would be 5. But now the man drew back with a look of uncertainty. "Oh, pardon me. What a peculiar mark that is." The man gestured to Richard's arm, where his service tattoo was inked. "Oh, that, yes. I was in the service." "The service?" the man asked, sounding a bit distrustful. "Yes, the British Army. I was a medic back in the day, before becoming a dentist." "Oh, you're a Muggle!" Where before the man had appeared standoffish, now he looked like a child on Christmas morning. "How wonderful!" Quite, I suppose." Richard wasn't sure what to say, but once again he was amazed that this group of people who seemed so insular and withdrawn from ordinary society could be so welcoming. "Magical folk really seem to like us, I take it?" It was the man's turn to look a bit befuddled. "I'm pleased to hear you say that. Relations between the magical and Muggle worlds haven't always been the best. I'm glad to know that you've received a warm reception. Arthur Weasley." The ginger-haired man held out a hand. "Richard Granger." "Arthur!" a woman bellowed from 3 cars down the platform. "Excuse me, it was wonderful meeting you," and with that, Arthur hurried away to find his wife. Richard turned to look for Linda and Hermione, only to find his path blocked by Lucius Malfoy. "Ah, Lucius, good to see you," he said, holding out a hand. Lucius shook it with a small bow, which Richard returned awkwardly. "I see you've met Arthur Weasley." Lucius sneered slightly. "You two not get along?" "We've had words. Arthur works for the Ministry of Magic. He seems to feel that the government should be allowed to enter one's home and snoop around with little provocation or reason. Ah, geez. Kind of power-hungry, is that right? Lucius smiled warmly. Yes. Happens to the best of them. They go into things with the best of intentions, but get lost along the way, I suppose. Lucius nodded, then asked, "And how is young Miss Granger this morning? Ready to take on the magical world?" "Oh, yes. She's most excited." "Good. Ah, here's Narcissa with Draco." "Dearest, you recall Lord Granger?" Lucius said smoothly to his approaching wife. "Lord Granger, we just wanted to say once again how honoured we were to host you in our home, and to assure you that Draco and his friends will do all they can to protect Hermione whilst she's at Hogwarts," Narcissa finished. Draco hung back, breathing hard at this promise. He understood that this Muggle had performed special operations for the Dark Lord, but he was uncertain how much part he wanted to take in any such missions. Hermione Granger was smart, that was certain, but was she also cunning, ruthless, dangerous? Still, Draco could not deny that there was something interesting about the girl. She seemed to already know the incantations for dozens of spells. She rattled off the names and uses of several potions at dinner weeks before, and she seemed interested in everything magical. Everything he had to say, everything about his house, all whilst possessing so much knowledge already. It was, frankly, a bit scary and exciting. A part of Draco was afraid to spend time round her, and another part was afraid not to, lest she not notice him. "Assure you that Draco and his friends will do all that they can to protect Hermione while she's at Hogwarts," Mrs. Malfoy was saying as Hermione and her mother approached. Hermione's eyes went wide. First of all, it sounded as though Draco's mother thought Hogwarts was dangerous. Why would she need protection? And second of all, was Draco planning to hang around her? Hermione had always been smart. That much was clear. It was made obvious to her not just by her parents from a young age, but by other children. Smarty Pants, teacher's pet, Little Miss Know-it-all, Brainiac, Swatty Dotty. She'd been called all manner of mean-spirited monikers in her life, and whilst some of that builds character, most of it just hurt. She could count her friends on one hand. Jacob, a neighbour boy, a year younger than her, had always been kind and friendly. Her parents' best friends had a daughter near her age, and Allison was usually willing to play with Barbies or roller skate together whilst their parents visited. In school, she usually sat with Courtney and Lara to eat lunch. They were friends with each other and didn't mind occasionally including her in their conversations. But Hermione had no one her own age that she could call to pour out her troubles. There was no one in the world who, when asked to name their closest friends, would think to name Hermione Granger. And Draco, despite his eccentricities and general air of distrust regarding Muggle things, seemed like a nice person. He was smart, and he knew a lot about the wizarding world. He also seemed to have lots of friends. People gravitated to him, whether it was his good looks or his confident manner. "You will?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Of course," Draco said brusquely. Then at his father's stern look he elaborated, "It would be my honour." Oh. Mr. Malfoy was forcing him to do this, then. Draco's father was on the board of governors for Hogwarts. This was likely some kind of Muggle integration program, a buddy system to match Muggleborns with purebloods in an effort to help them fit in. Still, beggars couldn't be choosers, and perhaps Draco and his friends would come to like her in time. In any case, his smile went all the way to his eyes, and it was friendly, even if forced. Her parents shook hands and exchanged bows with the Malfoys once more, then turned to her as they walked away. "Please, be safe, and have fun at school. We know you'll do an excellent job at studying, but take time to get to know your classmates. You'll be spending time with them for the next 7 years, after all," her mother reminded her as she hugged her close. Hermione's father gave her one last hug. "We love you, Crabcake. Go and do great things. And don't forget to write to us." The train whistle blew behind them. Now that the moment of departure was close, Hermione's stomach was in knots. Was it too late to turn back? To just leave? Go back home to the comfort of Hampstead? Seeing her look of worry and indecision, Richard ran a hand over her hair and kissed her forehead. "Crabcake?" "What is a witch's favourite insect?" Hermione smiled, pushing back the lump in her throat, and wiping away the tear that threatened to fall down her cheek. "A spelling bee." "Right in one," Richard chuckled.
Thank you for listening to The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. If you enjoyed this and would like to listen to more, please subscribe to me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts at Silver and Copper, or search Great 78 on Archive of Our Own.